All right, Maddie Gerber, I've had the pleasure of having a couple of conversations with you, but a few people here may not know who you are. So let's say you're on a dating app. How would you introduce yourself?
So my name is Madeline Grace Gerber. Great name, good job, Mum. I grew up on Gamaragal Guringai country in the northern Sydney region. So I'd actually just like to acknowledge as well that we're on Wongal and Gadigal lands and sovereignty was never ceded. And I'd like to extend my acknowledgement to any First Nations people who are here today. Thank you for being here. Grew up over there, so I feel very connected to the bush and the beach. Saltwater woman, for sure. I have a great family. I've got 2 big brothers who both live overseas, which is sad, but they're the best. I'm very much who I am today because of them. And great parents. Grew up with my grandma in my grandma's house, so I know a lot of flower names thanks to her. She was like the flower ranger at our local church, and when she stopped doing it when she got old, my dad was always like, the flowers just aren't as good as when grandma was doing it. I love music. That's like, I feel like in everyday life where God meets me the most often is through nature and through music. And I DJ like every other person in Sydney, apparently. I do that. I just organised a couple of events, actually, in like the Sydney music scene, which was really cool. I think that's probably what I'd put on my dating app.
Okay.
Yeah.
And currently you work for an organisation called Reconciliation New South Wales. Can you tell us a bit about the organisation and the work you do in there?
Yeah. So Reconciliation New South Wales is a 27-year-old organisation, and our main, slogan is amplify Aboriginal voices and educate allies. So we do everything that we can to support First Nations-led causes, so sort of like raise the age, change the record, family matters. We were very, very active in the referendum this last year. This last year is huge. Like a great privilege to have worked on that campaign, but also just dealing with a lot of devastation and shame over this nation. But I guess I'll get into that later. So we do a lot of public education, a lot of awareness raising. We try and facilitate cultural education in schools. So we have relationships with elders and cultural educators who will go into schools and teach children the histories of this country and Aboriginal perspectives on spirituality and caretaking of land and stuff. I'm a project officer, so that means I do everything because it's a non-profit and we're like a very small team of 5. So everyone does everything, and it's like my first big girl job. I did a sociology, social justice, politics degree, and I literally figured out that working as a big girl job, you just make it up and you act like you know what you're doing, and that's kind of what's been happening.
A number of people here are like,
like I go into these interviews with these people that are important and I'm like, whoa, okay, but I just act like I know what I'm doing, and no one questions it, so that's cool.
For the win. That's great.
Love it. But I love this job so much. I would say that the 2 passions of my life are feminism and Aboriginal rights. And obviously there's some nuances I'm non-Indigenous, so there's some nuances being a non-Indigenous person working in this space, and I have had my challenges with that, but just at the end of the day, like First Nations people are 3.5% of this population, and like I'm all for sovereignty and self-determination, but like they need allies, you know, and so I think I have overcome that feeling of like guilt because, I think non-Indigenous people do need to be in this space, and Aboriginal people can't keep doing the work of educating everyone all the time because they've got their own communities to support, and that's where the strength really resides, is like in mob and in kinship and in community. And I'm very privileged to see a lot of that working in Redfern, which, you know, socio-political centre of Aboriginal rights in Sydney. So I work with a lot of community-controlled organisations and around a lot of mob, and it's like, the privilege of my life that I get to walk into that office and just get relationships in that way that I know growing up on the North Shore of Sydney I would never have gotten because you talk about like this, you know, body of Aboriginal people, like they're this other, but very few of us. I think there was like 83% of Australians they found in a survey had never, like they don't think that they've ever interacted with an Aboriginal person.
yeah.
They're like, I don't know anyone, I've never talked to anyone. So there's just this huge like gap in really understanding on the ground.
Yeah.
Anyway, I tangented.
No, this is really good. So
Yeah.
Reconciliation New South Wales, it sounds like has a combination of Indigenous and non-Indigenous
Yeah.
staff people, yeah?
Yeah, we're led by a non-Indigenous and Indigenous board.
Okay, cool. This is not one of the prepared questions, but for you, you talked about allyship, the importance of allyship. In your work or in your life, or particularly from your passion for this, what do you think makes for good allyship? What makes for helpful allyship in this space?
Great question. Listening.
Okay.
Yeah, literally just listening, and like humbling yourself, and not going. I think that sometimes I see people being like, oh, I just feel so ashamed and so guilty and like I don't know where to start. And to be honest, I think focusing on that like detracts from moving forward.
Okay.
Like guilt and shame have a place, but if you're like fixating on that as a way to stop you from like taking action, and you know, you see it with educators, they're like, I don't know how to talk about this in the classroom, and it's fair enough, like you don't want to say the wrong thing, but that actually stops you from trying to do anything.
Anything, yeah.
Yeah, so listen constantly, be led by First Nations people, and humble yourself to unlearn. Unlearn, yeah, because all of us are, products of the colonising project.
100%.
And all of us have so many things to unlearn and to learn, like, you know, genocide and dispossession and massacres, and just like there's so little that is taught in, historical and educational institutions. And just go and find the resources that exist out there to learn about that. Yeah.
I saw something you, Sarah, posted maybe yesterday about if like black kids or kids of colour are old enough to experience racism, then white kids are old enough to learn about it. So it sounds like part of the work you do is schools-based education around, you know, truth of history, truth of current stuff. You mentioned two passions, feminism and Indigenous stuff. How did those passions come to be so front and centre for you?
Well, feminism, I mean, that's a bit different, but I'm a woman, and I'm a pretty fiery woman, if I'm being honest, and I think that that's interesting because, that's interesting to, like, interact with the world as, like, a very outspoken woman. I come from a long line of strong women, and, I just don't think that this world's really going to achieve much whilst women are still so subservient to men. But in Australia, it's good. I'm like, one of my favourite parts of my job actually is working with volunteers, because the backbone of the volunteer network is retired women. And especially in like the reconciliation space, they have been there from the beginning. Like they walked over the bridge. They've just been in it their whole lives.
Yeah.
And so I get to have these relationships with these women, and I look at them and I'm like, thank you so much for doing the work of feminism that you have done, because I'm in a position where I feel empowered by my gender. And so thank you for that work.
I love
and
that.
some of them are like, thanks for saying that.
Yeah.
So that's feminism. That's on that side.
Yeah.
In terms of Aboriginal rights, I just think that the deepest shame of this country is how we colonised it and the ongoing impacts of colonisation. And the colonial project is just like far-reaching, and I'm so, I actually can't like celebrate our nationhood until we do that. And I love Australia. And I think that's the really interesting thing that unites Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people is our love for this land. I think we all deeply feel that connection to the land, but Aboriginal spirituality and caretakership is so deeply interwoven with that. And it's strange to me that we don't then go and explore that connection or celebrate that, or, you know, like invite that as part of our nationhood and our national identity. And that's what I think the future of rectifying this is creating a national identity, not off sausages and the beach, but off the 65,000 years of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures that have been living and flourishing, and the reason that this land has been taken care of. And we've just reversed so much of that in 230 years. And so I love Australia, but like especially in this last year, I actually don't feel like I can be a part of Australia. I can't celebrate our nationhood until we walk behind First Nations people to lead for the good of their own people. Yeah.
That's a great segue into my next question. Last year was a big year. You worked extremely hard leading up to the referendum, and then the result was what it was. My general question is, what motivates you in the work that you do? But I guess my follow-up question is, has your motivation been affected by the referendum result?
Yes, my motivation has been affected by the referendum result, because I actually plan on moving overseas this year, and I have this thing in my head where I'm like, cool, I can tap out.
Right.
And I just realised, like, Aboriginal people never get to tap out, ever. It's their life. And I was speaking to like a Gamilaroi friend of mine, and he was like, yeah, dude, after the referendum, I thought I was going to quit my job as well, but I just realised, and move overseas, but I just realised I actually can't do that. Like, I can't leave my family. I'm going to study law here and become a lawyer instead. So it's a great privilege that I get to be less motivated. I get to choose to be less motivated.
Sure, as a non-Indigenous person.
Yeah. What was the other question?
What motivates you in your work?
What motivates me in my work? Just seeing an Australia that gives its due acknowledgement and reverence to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Something that astounds me every day is how, just in the face of like mass incarceration, daily racism, child removal, separation from kinship and culture and land and intergenerational trauma, they are still the kindest and most generous people I've ever met. Like the feeling of sitting with an elder, like that is holy. There is a reverence.
Very sacred, yes.
There is a reverence in an elder.
Yes.
And so I just see, despite all of the impacts that we continuously have on these people, they're still so generous and kind and strong, and they're still doing so much for their communities. And that motivates me a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just, would love to see a better Australia. I'm just so ashamed.
I assume post-referendum there was a period of like, are you still feeling that sense of like, oh my gosh, this country? Or is there a bit of like, okay, all right, let's go, let's keep going?
I would love to say that there was that, but unfortunately, no.
That's okay.
For me, I nanny these two kids, and it was a really interesting thing being with them throughout the referendum, because one of them's like 4, another one's 8. And they just get it. They know they're on Gamaragal country. And when there was a no result, they were really upset. And they were like, why couldn't we vote? I don't understand why they said no. You know what I mean? And I just like looked at these kids and I was like, you're going to be leading the country in 20 years. You know, like I think I have enough faith that in 20 years it will be different. But what sucks about the referendum is, number one, it was a decision being made by non-Indigenous people for Indigenous people. Yep. So inherently it's detracting from self-determination. And then the other thing that sucked was that the people who were the majority of the no vote were just going to die in 10 to 20 years and actually never see what the seed of this policy could have done.
Good point, yeah.
So I think there was many things that could have been done differently, but there's still treaty, there's still truth. I personally think truth-telling is the most important part, but I think this country's so not ready to hear it.
Sure.
Which is something that like Megan Davis and, you know, the proponents of the statement said. It was like voice, treaty and truth is a very important order, because once we accept voice, we're ready for treaty, and then we're ready for truth.
Right.
But we're not even ready for voice, you know. But I think in 20 years that will change.
Okay.
Because I do think that like children are getting it, and like my generation is getting it. But then I'm in an echo chamber of the inner west where everyone's progressive and I don't know. Yeah. Honestly, most of my friends were like, do I vote no? I can't tell, like, because of the like left-leaning Aboriginal no. That confused so many people, and it was just, that was really interesting. I had a lot of conversations around that. So yeah.
I appreciate your honesty, Maddie. Thank you. You
Yeah.
mentioned the kind of the holiness, the sacredness that comes with sitting with an elder and listening, and the kind of thin place, that can be. From memory, in my conversation with you, faith has been a part of your life, in and out of church, for your life. Are there ways that your sense of faith now intersects with or influences the work that you do?
Deeply. I think, deeply. But for me, what really, really interests me is the intersection of Aboriginal spirituality with Christianity.
Yeah.
Because the church is responsible for so much for, the stolen generations and missionaries and, loss of language. The church is responsible for so much. And yet, despite that, 2016 ABS statistics show that 73% of Aboriginal people self-report as Christians. And I find that so fascinating because despite the traumatic influence that the church has had, the person of Jesus Christ resonated with them so much.
True.
And I think that that's because Aboriginal people have always known God. We didn't introduce God to them. They have been in unity with the land and their spirituality for 65,000 years.
Yes.
And so I think that what came to them was, the Messiah, but it was something that they've always been connected to. And the creator spirit is talked about in the dream time. And that creator spirit is God.
Love that.
And God gave them stewardship over the land, and they've been living in unity through creation. So that's something that I've been thinking about sort of since high school, after first learning about Aboriginal spirituality.
Yeah.
And
I think, no, you're okay. Sorry, you finished. I think one of the most sacred things I see is Indigenous communities that are able to hold to the core of the person of Jesus and the core of the gospel, and kind of stripping back the colonial bullshit that has gone alongside that from the missionary venture. Do you know what I mean? There's a really powerful sense of Jesus doesn't belong to white people or second people. There is a reclaiming of the core of that in some spaces that I think is really profound. It's very, very cool. So we've been talking about vocation. You've had a few different jobs, and you're now with Reconciliation New South Wales, and who knows, where you'll go into the future. Do you see each of those chapters of work as distinct chapters, or is there some weaving of purpose or vocation, from uni up until where you are now?
I think that this is lifelong.
Yeah.
Whether I earn money in this space or not, as in have a job in it or not, this is a lifelong thing. And that's, I think, what allyship is as well. Even though I say, oh my gosh, I'm going to tap out and move overseas, I guess I'm saying, two conflicting things here. But I know Australia will always be my home. This is a lifelong commitment to learning and continuing to try and be part of the change that I want to see in Australia, and learning from First Nations people.
Yeah.
Does that
Yeah,
answer it?
Absolutely, yeah. I have a final question about your being part of Art Uniting Church, but I think given the conversation, I actually want to throw it open for questions now, and then I'll come back to that last question. So what's on your heart, friends? Are there questions that you'd like to ask of Maddie? Is that a hand? No, it was just an elbow. Okay. Yes, Alex. Yeah.
yeah, hearing it back, I sound pretty morbid, but sorry,
It's okay.
guys.
No, this,
Yeah, off the back of the referendum, I guess. I guess what I mean in 20 years is that I think that's when leadership will change, in terms of like a government, like a whole government that will support Aboriginal issues, or a majority of a government. That's what I see. But I mean, state-based treaty processes are already happening, but it's just so interesting how swayed government is by people. You know what I mean? Like, this process started in Queensland a year ago, and then we got such a quick and ferocious no. They retracted the treaty making process in Queensland. So, and like, we can have a state-based voice body. South Australia is already doing, you know, treaty-based things. So I'm not saying that like we're not going to be moving forward in the next 20 years. I definitely do think that we're going to be moving forward. But I think what the referendum has indicated to us is that like a large proportion of the nation is racist. But another large proportion of the nation is apathetic.
Yes.
And so many of them, I think that like they didn't realize the weight of a no. And then I think there's a lot of people after the referendum result that was like, whoa, what did my no actually just do? So maybe this will be a moment in history that we do learn from. I mean, I think it will be a moment in Australian history our children will be looking at in history books and being like, what the hell happened there?
Yeah.
So yes, I do think that change will come before 20 years. Like, I do think we will make progress before 20 years. But yeah, I just think that a lot needs to happen to address racism and mindsets, and people don't even think that they know any Aboriginal people. Like, there's such a divide, and that divide is almost there for like self-protection, you know what I mean? Like, it's always so generous when I meet an Aboriginal person who's like, this is my culture, I want to invite you into it.
Yes.
That's generous,
Yes.
you know what I mean? But I would be completely fine if it was like, this is my culture and I'm going to keep it my culture because of what, you know, second Australians have done to us. So
100%.
yeah, I do think that change will happen in sooner than 20 years. I do think that state-based treaty processes will continue as they are. I'm interested to see what happens. I'm just so disappointed. I don't know. I just think there's so much work to do with public education. So what can you do, I think, is just like continuously have conversations with like your loved ones. You know what I mean? Yeah, I think like the most powerful thing you can do is you can educate yourself, and then you can do that to go and educate 5 more people. Because I think at the
Spread it like that.
Yeah, at the base of this is just like huge lack of knowledge and ignorance and understanding. And like people don't even know the difference between equality and equity. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
yeah. So I know I sound morbid. I do think change will happen in
we
less than
appreciate
20
the real.
years.
We
Yeah,
appreciate the real.
yeah. It's just been a really tough year, to be
100%.
honest. Yeah, it was huge. And I can't imagine how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers, sisters and siblings are feeling. Yeah, it's like, yeah. So I'm going to wait for them to lead. And, you know, the leadership on that is still quite quiet. And I think we're just giving them sufficient time to mourn. But I will wait for the leadership for the next steps. But I don't know if the next steps are going to be as generous as the Uluru Statement was. That was a generous statement. I invite you to walk with us, and we said no. So, but I don't know what's going to come next. Yeah.
Sonia.
This is a little maybe controversial. Do you think that, like, given you spend so much time with our First Nations people and you speak with their elders and what have you, in your view, what do you think, in terms of the temperature gauge as to their pride into who they are, like their, you know, because we talk about self-determination and I guess for myself, in my own personal journey, I'm not a First Nations person, but I think my own personal value of who I am, that piece is so critical. Just in terms of your interactions with our First Nations people, what do you think, it's a 2-part question, how do you think that is? Like what is the state of that? And as allies, what are the things, what sorts of things can we do to help our First Nations people have that self-pride and acceptance and love for themselves?
So the state of, I guess, First Nations people's connection and pride with themselves.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. I think I see like sort of three camps. One is, very sadly, so many First Nations people are not connected with their culture. I actually have a lot of First Nations friends who are Indigenous, but they almost have like a little bit of shame around it because they feel like they're like half part of it, but also so not. Like, you know, they feel like they've grown up in a white world, but they can't participate in like their Indigenous culture. So I think you've got like a lot of people who can't celebrate the pride of being an Aboriginal person because they themselves don't feel in their identity that they are Aboriginal because of being in the colonised system and, you know, family separation and stuff. And then I think that you have a portion of people that are very, very proud, as they should be. And yeah, they are with mob and they are reconnecting to culture and they are celebrating their strengths. Actually, I think that's like a large portion of people who've been like lucky enough to grow up on country and with their family and stuff. And then I think that there's a portion that, are really proud, but are don't have the capacity to like bring non-Indigenous people into their culture because they're doing so much to take care of their own people. Like, I literally was with a woman the other day and she was talked about, she got a phone call from like a prison and one of her 7 brothers is in jail. And she needs to know, and she doesn't recognize which jail it is because she doesn't know which brother is calling. And it's like, I just sat there and I was like, oh, that's the reality. You know what I mean? So like they're dealing with mass incarceration and child removal, like constantly at higher rates than missions, like it's crazy. So I think that, I think that so many structural and systemic forms of oppression stop the pride being celebrated and the culture being celebrated, because at the end of the day, they just need to survive through the colonial project. So I think there's like, that's a long-winded answer, but I think that that's different portions, and I think the way that Australians can maybe help that is to celebrate Aboriginal culture, to organise welcome to countries, to, if you're an educator, orchestrate getting a cultural educator coming into the school and sharing with children the practices of like caretaking and bush medicine, you know, things like that make kids be like, wow, this is part of Australia and this is because of Aboriginal people. Does that answer the question? Yeah, I keep checking back in because I forget what's happening.
It's okay. Yep. I think we'll do one more question before I. Yes, Lockie.
What do you see the church's role of reconciliation?
Great question.
Great question. Well, this is kind of linked in with the question that I'm excited to answer, which is, why is Luck your church?
You can answer that now. That's good.
I can answer that now. Cool. I'm going to say a little thing, and it ties in with that, I swear. But actually, how I heard about Luck was through an Uluru Statement from the Heart, like community preparation thing that the Inner West Council was running, and a member of our congregation, Raoul, was at my table, and he was like, so our church was really involved in the plebiscite, and now we're going to be really involved in the Uluru Statement from the Heart because, you know, the Uniting Church has this covenant of understanding that, you know, we didn't introduce God to Aboriginal people. And I turned around and I was like, what church do you go to? Because
what is this magical space?
I was like, I mean, like, I'm queer. All of my friends are queer. I don't really want to live a life where I'm getting told that we all live in sin. But I've always had faith with God, and like the more my life goes on, the more God is like, the pinnacle of life for me. And the person of Jesus is someone that I am getting to know more. But I just think that it's so good that the Uniting Church has this statement that literally acknowledges the church's role in invasion and in the destruction of culture.
Yes.
And I read it quite a lot before this interview, and it's amazing. It acknowledges that like your people, this is what the minister from, the Uniting Church says, is like your people have always been here and have always been living with the divine, and us as the church, we should have been the representatives of God, and instead we were there with the government enforcing paternalistic assimilation policies alongside government. And like for the church to acknowledge that, and then for them to say, because then the person responds, the minister from the United Aboriginal and Islander Church responds, and he's like, well, it would be a lot for me to just say, I forgive you. But what is true forgiveness is us turning to the future and then working on this together through justice, and to you to consistently do things to support, provide resources and acknowledge First Nations people. We are doing this together for true forgiveness. And so that is amazing. So I think that that's what the church should be doing. I think the church should be doing this. I think we should be uniting, like acknowledging country. I think that we should be supporting the referendum like you did. I love this congregation because I think that it's doing everything that it can, like community spaces are so special for the amount of influence that they have. And I think every community space could use their influence to do good for social justice. And I genuinely believe that this church is living out the call that Jesus had, which is to enact justice in the community. And yet one of the ways it is doing that is through supporting First Nations issues and trying to educate people and, turning up at rallies and all that kind of thing. I think like some sort of, in terms of the church generally, I think some sort of like pay the rent or like financial remuneration process. I mean, I know that we're a different very church from something like Hillsong, but Hillsong could really do something like that. They'd be making money, So, things like that, like the call of Jesus to be doing justice in community and how that translates to in our local sphere. And our local sphere is, Aboriginal rights. Like that's the thing that we should be doing in Australia as Australians, I think. Yeah.
How great is Maddie? I have one more question. It's not the one that I prepared. I just have a question for you, and then we'll go into table group discussion. But first, I'm really glad you're part of this congregation. I'm so glad you found us, and you've been such a gift this morning. I can feel how people have been really blessed by your story and your really honest answers, so thank you. My final question is this. So you work with a group called Reconciliation New South Wales. Reconciliation largely is the word that Australia uses for the work that we are to do, with First and Second Nations people. I heard a theologian somewhere say that the word reconciliation doesn't quite fit the work that we are called to do, because it implies that there was a time when we were conciled, that we were at peace with one another. But really, the story of Australia is not that. We didn't come and start well and then devolve. It started badly from the First Fleet. So I guess my question is, how does the word reconciliation sit with you? And are there other words, better words, that might best be used to describe the work that we are called to do?
Yeah, I do think that. I mean, I didn't name my organisation. I think 27 years ago, the word reconciliation had a lot more resonance, because 1991 was the Paul Keating speech in Redfern.
Yes.
And that's when he introduced reconciliation. That was it. So for a long time, that's just what it's been used as. And actually, after the referendum, there was some articles going around like reconciliation is dead. And then our organisation had a conversation about rebranding. You know what I mean? Because I don't think that the word reconciliation is a white man's job. It's got nothing to do with First Nations people being involved in that.
Yes.
So, yeah. Do I think there are other words that are better?
I know some people use reparation. Some people use solidarity.
Yeah.
Are there, do they resonate better with you? What do you think?
Yeah, I think solidarity does. Allyship, reparation. I don't know. I keep saying the word shame, but there's just like so much shame for me. Rectify. I just really think we need to, rectify the wrongs of the past, but relationship.
Yep.
Actually, now that I've said it, that feels like the most appropriate word. I think that so much of this is about like true, honest, humble relationships with First Nations people.
Which was the invitation of the Uluru Statement, wasn't it? Be in relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Walk with us for a brighter future. Yeah, but I'm going to, we all can just keep walking.
Totally.
We'll just wait for their leadership on what's next.
Yeah.
And we'll be there for that. Just, don't don't stop just because there was a no result. If anything, go harder. I will come back to this. I know I'm doing the whole I'm moving overseas thing, but I'll never stop trying to show up in this space.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.